Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to another edition of SplatterCast. It's been a while, to say the least. We haven't posted in quite some time, but I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And we are back, baby. We have a new setup, a new platform, if you will, here to do this. We're doing it remotely, and we got all this fresh new equipment and all these new fancy things to learn and improve the show. And I think the biggest sentiment that we have going on between us is this: we're just going to push into consistency. And
Look, I
right
can
now,
actually see you.
with our lives and everything going on, like it just makes more sense for us to be able to do this remotely, where we can just hop on, have a conversation about some movies that we like that are bloody, scary, however you want to cut it, and we just come in and do it and get it back to you guys. So hopefully, if all goes well, the content will be shooting up quite a bit.
You know, I liked when we did it more sporadic, when we would release one episode and then 2 months later another one.
Yeah, it's like very high art. Like, we just don't really give a shit when we post. It's just kind of whenever we feel like it, because it's
Whenever we
it's
felt
about
like
us.
making content, it's like
Yeah,
it's
it's
out
not
to the
about the
masses. It
fans.
doesn't matter.
But I mean, this has been a long time coming. I know that we discussed trying to go remote pretty early on in 2020 because of everything that was going on. And like we had consistency with our by admission only podcast, which is also in talks to be rebooted. We got to see how this one goes first, but it's pretty great to finally be at this point, in my opinion. Like, I'm just really happy that we finally went and did this. So
Yeah, because with COVID and everything, I think technology's finally caught up, because the discussion always was, is the quality going to be there? And now I think we have reached that point, and we kind of got on it. So like we talked about, our biggest issue was consistency. So now it's kind of like getting the ball rolling here, and we should be off to the races. Fingers crossed.
yeah, and I mean, we don't really have any excuses now that, like I said, it's literally we just hop on and get it going. The only thing that takes time is really just getting all the extra cool content that we have for you guys. I mean, you saw the new intro. We're still going to be working on a couple things. I don't think anything here is set in stone. I just want to say that out loud as far as designs, fonts. So please give us any feedback that you can, anything that we could work on. I mean, I'm pretty humble in that aspect, that we're still learning how to do this, and we've been on and off podcasting for like 4 years now. So
We
like,
are veterans.
it is we're getting
But
there.
the fun fact here is, I believe Dylan did pitch the remote excuse as just so that he could up his NECA figure collection.
Yes, yeah, that's something that I've unfortunately I've bought a lot of NECAs in preparation for this, because like I watch all these podcasts and stuff like with people doing this very similar thing, and like everybody's got really cool backgrounds, and I got a lot of cool horror movie shit that I like to show off, and this is like the perfect thing, like my nerd room, like my American Werewolf poster, and I got the poster for the Friday the 13th box set, and you do too. You got the lithograph back there, which is awesome.
Which
So.
believe we talked about it on one of one of our earlier podcasts.
Yes.
When this was coming out, we were going to talk about the Friday 13th box set and stuff like that, which we never got to, but we are definitely going to do it.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I really want to get into. I know we have our favorites, but we need to get into some of those shittier Friday 13th.
I know. Yeah, because like I feel like we've covered our favorites a couple of times, just over the years. So like, yeah, we do need to dive into like the Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X era, because those are very weird times, very different times for
There's fun to be had
for
in
that.
those
But
viewings.
so I think I'll let you start it off here. We kind of discussed, coming back to it, what our first show was going to be. We threw a couple things around. We got a list together, but we landed on werewolves. So I think I'm going to throw it over to Luke here to kind of introduce us here and what our title is and all that.
Oh man, well, I think this was your creation here.
Was it?
Werewolves, Not Swearwolves is the title of this episode. Because, I mean, let's face it, we do love werewolves, but the werewolf concept, I would say, has really become almost a dirty word. I would say in Hollywood, because I mean, we have had complete shit, for the most part. There are some gems out there, but, usually when you hear werewolf movie, especially when it's, like, random Tubi werewolf movie, there's a certain connotation there of you're not really gonna be getting quality. So it's like and everything we're kinda gonna be talking about in this podcast kinda ranges. I think we're gonna be talking about the elite of the elite films, at least in our opinions. But there is a good chunk of crap out there.
Yeah, and that is all filth and garbage and what I just call like fast food horror that I absolutely adore. I'm always on Tubi. I'm always watching these stupid, shitty werewolf movies. I think I watched Dire Wolf, and I actually went down the rabbit hole of Bigfoot movies too while I was
You have
on
a
this.
higher tolerance of that stuff than I do, because it's like as soon as I see something, I just from the poster alone, I will not even go toward it. Like
I
you are like, bring me all the crap. Let
I
me see
I
it.
I'm like a sci-fi channel kid, dude. Like I grew up on like all those Saturday night movies. There is one on this list that if we get time to, I do want to talk about. If not, we are going to talk about in the future at some point. I'll convince you to review it because like it's just it's such an odd time for me, honestly. That between the time of I want to say like between when I was born, 98 to the like probably about 2006, that stretch there of just sci-fi original movies when it comes to creature features, monsters, all that shit is just some of that fast food garbage horror that I just adore. Like it's like
Yeah.
from it's just this evolution of like the effects honestly got worse as time went on because they went to CG instead of having to do them practically. And like that's the funny thing is so like you'll go back and watch something from like 2002 and it's not great. It doesn't look great. It looks like it was shot on a VHS tape or a VD camera or whatever, but it's the fact that it's like they still use practical effects. They still have to, have budgetary constrictions that they do get over that it just gets so lazy as you get past that. I want to say like that 2007, 2008 era is like when the CG really starts to hit and it gets even lazier and lazier.
Yeah,
But
because I mean, we'll
I'm a
dive
fan.
into it here in a little bit where I mean, we kinda get stuck in this revolving door of, we wanna do a werewolf movie, but the budget isn't there, so we're gonna really harp on CGI,
Mhm.
and then you just don't get the quality of a lot of those earlier films.
Yeah.
Um, but there is one movie that has the highest quality, especially between us both, that is well, and probably regarded by the werewolf community in general,
Mhm.
is the film of werewolf films. Which leads us into our topic, silver bullets and silver medals.
Nicest piece of work I ever done, I think. It's got a low grain load, so it won't tumble. Ought to be pretty accurate.
Oh, well, shoot, it's just a gag. I mean, what the heck you gonna shoot a 44 bullet at anyway? Made out of silver.
How about a werewolf?
God damn, I love me some Gary Busey. That man, I tell you, I could stare at him for hours. But no, we're not talking about Silver Bullet just yet. We are talking there are werewolf movies and there is the werewolf movie. And that's
I agree.
1981's John Landis's An American Werewolf in London. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into here is kind of like uh, as we were talking about you love your creatures features and stuff.
Mhm.
Jaws is a big one. And it's like when Jaws came out, I don't know if there's ever been a shark film that is up to that standard. And it's like that was really the first big shark film. And same
Mhm.
thing with John Landis's film here is we didn't really have previously the Wolfman, and then you kind of had all those iterations, Abbott and Costello, all those random things going on. But you didn't really have a big werewolf movie. And then shoot toward 1981, I mean, we had a lot of werewolf movies come out in that year, but John Landis's came out, and I mean that everyone you talk to, werewolf lovers, just general audience goers, if you mention werewolves, An American Werewolf in London is what everyone talks about. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, does that kind of shy away some actual filmmakers to be like, well, John Landis already did it. I mean, he already got a 10 out of 10 here. So why am I even going to try to contend with that? So we don't really get the best of the best filmmakers trying to make a werewolf movie.
And yeah, I mean, like it really is the godfather of werewolf films. At the end of the day, like if you're looking about it in this community of, werewolf lovers or horror lovers in general, I mean, this movie is one of the pinnacle. I mean, like you're getting to the point now where we're seeing American Werewolf action figures, and
Yeah.
like Funko Pops and things like that. And I mean, it's just like the lasting power, the staying power of this movie is huge. It is on that level of like a Godfather or, a Taxi Driver. Just like that's where it is. It's in the zeitgeist, it's in the conversation at all times. Like if you very I feel like very rarely find people who are really into horror movies who haven't seen this movie or
Yeah.
at least heard of it or at least the transformation. Because like really at the end of the day, that is one of the biggest selling points of this movie. Um, and it's kind of funny at the fact that this is regarded mostly, and I see it in my eyes as this is a horror comedy. I mean, you're coming from a mind like John Landis, who's done things like Blues Brothers and Animal House and stuff, and he injects a lot of great bits of comedy in this movie. So it really juxtaposes with the terror. And I feel like that has a reason of why it sticks with so many people because it's a little bit more accessible in that angle. It's not so dark and brooding and very serious as it is. We're watching characters who see like David, who just seems like this average dude, just this American dude of abroad doing
Yeah.
his thing, and he acts like a normal person. It's not like he's some stoic vampire hunter who is also a werewolf kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like you're following a normal guy, and I think that's like part of the beauty of this movie, and like all those aspects with it.
And that's where it's like, it's defined as a horror comedy. And I've talked about it on this podcast where I hate that marriage between horror and comedy, where I find comedy to be, especially nowadays, it's in some situations it can be so overbearing that it takes me out of a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
But what Landis did in that movie is, yes, there's comedy, but it isn't like in your face comedy. It is that kind of English situational humor where it's light and it's appropriate and it doesn't at no time in that film am I thinking that I'm actually watching a comedy. It's like, life has humor in it, and I think he's injected that perfectly in terms of the circumstance of that film where um David comes off as a likable character. He's just flawed, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's married them both perfectly, horror and comedy, because I still look at that movie as a horror movie just with a little bit of comedy in it, because
Yeah,
that's
I
just
mean
life.
it does it right. Like it literally makes it so it's like it is to some people. I mean, I could totally see where it's like, oh, I don't put it on the level of a horror comedy. But I mean, like, this is to me, this is like on that same level of like an Evil Dead 2 as far as horror comedy goes, where it's like there are still genuine pieces of lore and horror and like that surrounding stuff that makes that interesting and makes that what we're looking for, but it's not afraid to not at the end of the day have likable characters, you know what I mean, and make
Yeah.
them funny and make them not take it so serious. I mean, some of my favorite moments in this movie are the parts with David and Jack. I mean, just having him coming back from the dead and talking to him and just like the nonchalantness of it is just so different. It's something that I don't think and many other directors or people would have even had the idea to do that. Why? Because they would have him being haunted and him showing up in mirrors, and stuff like that. If this was made today, I mean, he would be almost more of a antagonistic force. I feel like Jack would be, but in here he is just still his best friend. Like their chemistry from the very beginning of the movie lasts until we get to through the entire film basically. until Jack
There's
is basically a bag of bones. You know what I
there's
mean?
still that camaraderie,
Mhm.
even at the end when they're in the porno theater, where they're talking about, "Oh, you have to kill yourself," and Jack's like, David says, "Maybe I can, um, hang myself," and then Jack's like, "Oh, no, if you don't do it right and your neck doesn't snap, it could be painful," and they're like,
Mhm.
"Who cares?" And he's like, "Hey, do you mind? I'm talking to a friend here," So it's like
Mhm.
even what had happened to Jack, there's still that friendship and camaraderie there, and the moments where Jack does show up, there is a sense of comedy and a little bit of that, but they mix it so well with the horror of him, you know, eh, becoming more and more like a zombie, so it doesn't take you out of it. It's still it feels like two friends talking, and it doesn't feel like a scriptwriter wrote this to make everyone laugh, if that makes sense. It just
Yeah,
seems so natural,
it's just
and
how the
really adds
characters
to
are,
it. And
and I
that's
guess.
what
Oh, no, go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say to bring us kind of back to baseline too, after gushing for a little bit about this, is so the question being posed in this topic, the silver bullets and silver medals, is basically saying, have we already reached the peak? Have we reached the jaws of werewolf movies? And now, anybody who tries to attempt it is intimidated to the fact of that. And it's the reason why we get so many werewolf movies that are subpar, and we just can't reach that goal of like that gold standard that we want to with werewolf movies.
Yeah. That's kind of where, because as we are talking about, horror fans in general, I feel like there's only a few films that make it into that, almost like your prerequisite into being a horror fan, where it's like that feel like a real film. And to me,
Hmm.
I think The Shining's in there. I think John Carpenter's The Thing is in there,
Hmm.
and I think An American Werewolf in London's in there. I think those three are really three films that are in the horror genre, but they feel like three legitimate films.
Hmm.
And the thing we kind of get with a lot of the werewolf movies is that they're made a lot of times by fans that just want to have fun, and they don't have that outside looking in to be like, I want to make a real film. It's just going to happen to be a werewolf film. So you have as we're going to talk about here in a little bit, where you have a lot of these unique werewolf films, but it's really just more so unique in the situation and not necessarily in the filmmaking, where it's like, um, oh, I'm going to do a werewolf movie, but it's going to be about teen girls, or it's going to be about soldiers. That's the situation we're going with. We're not really constructing a perfect film. Not that those films aren't good, but I think John Landis's movie is on another level.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally agree. It is the godfather of werewolf movies. Like, I'll say it again. Like, it is just, they hit the nail on the head coming out the door. And like, that's hard to do. It is very much the same situation with Jaws. And I think that there's, me as, if you don't already know, if you're a new viewer, I'm a huge, not only do I like my fast food garbage, I like my creature features. So, Jaws is a pretty inspirational film for me.
Yeah,
Um, and so there's a lot more, I think, on the, uh, ocean creature features that they there's a lot left on the table on that
yeah,
side of things. Like, it is, they really, if we're talking, I think werewolf movies, at least, and we'll go through them, have movies that have really attempted and have hit certain levels of good. They're great, but
yeah,
they reach the height of American Werewolf? It's tough, and I think there's only a handful on here that I know even people would disagree with me, that they reach that pinnacle, in my opinion. But in a general audience sense, no, I think that this is definitely, it does intimidate people when it comes to making a werewolf project. It's a double-sided blade, basically,
yeah,
because it's a beautiful achievement where we love it, everything is great about it, and it's great. But you will never not make a werewolf movie that isn't compared to this in some way or another.
yeah. And that's
That's
where
it's
I'm
tough.
kind of at with this, where it's just like I think John Landis's film is going to be in a league of its own. probably
Mhm.
here, now, and forever.
Mm.
I don't see another one coming out that is going to have that effect on a general audience or the horror movie fans, that's going to live on for what, 40 plus years. I
Mm.
don't see that happening because it's like, and we're going to talk about our favorite werewolf movies, but it's like, again, those are I'm looking for a werewolf movie specifically, and I want to sit down and I want to watch these. So yes, they're good films. They're good werewolf films. Not that they're bad films in general. They're just like I think you'd have to recommend them to werewolf fans.
Mhm.
But there is one film that we just saw recently, both of us,
Yes.
that I will say feels like a real film. It just happens to have werewolves in it. Um, and it kind of carved its own path and made it feels really unique in terms of the genre. And of course, we're talking about The Cursed or Eight for Silver, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Then I'll just say, like, we're keeping it non-spoilers here because we definitely
Yeah.
want people to check this out. It's still, I think it's probably not in anybody's local theaters anymore, but it is on Vudu or any of your, it's for the theater at home experience. You can pay your $20 and watch it. It's what we did. But yeah, it's already losing 1 point for me for this thing that I had to bring up because I've been talking about it since I saw the damn movie or since I even heard about it. The title change.
Yep.
8 for Silver, you watch this movie and it's perfect. It's a perfect title. It makes complete sense, narratively, everything. And they change it to The Cursed, which is a little closer to the, I almost said Wes Anderson. Wes Craven it's just cursed,
Yes.
right? And it's just like that.
I
Another
think was a big
werewolf film.
misstep.
Yeah, not great. Although there's a bunch of rumors and stuff I've heard online about that movie needing a director's cut because apparently the movie we got is not the movie we were seeing or we were supposed to see. There should be basically a Zack Snyder's Justice League of the cursed or no
Of
cursed.
Cursed?
Sorry. Yes, I guess
I
so.
don't know. I honestly I don't know about that. Like I watched the director's cut of like Bad Moon and I was expecting like, okay, oh, we're gonna see something pretty cool here. And I mean there are a couple little extra things. I'm always like disappointed with a
Mm,
lot of stuff. Now I haven't seen like the Zack Snyder stuff, so I don't
I
know.
did.
But
It's not
um
disappointing. It's actually a way better movie.
where they it just in my experience, it's always been like, oh, it's a different movie. And then
Mhm.
it's like 3 more minutes of gore, and I'm like, "Meh, it doesn't really change that much."
Yeah, it's kind of like the unrated version of the recent Evil Dead. Is just basically extended gore scenes and a couple other thrown in little blurbs that we saw online before it even hit.
I know,
But
because I remember you got that, and you were like, "Oh, I have that," and then you told me, I was like, "Ah, it's just a couple extra things."
my completionist collector brain was like, this is the version I need. This is what the director intended.
I need
Um,
to see it all.
but yeah, 8 for Silver, The Cursed, however you want to say it. Um, really unique, really interesting take on a werewolf flick, and I think exactly what the genre should be striving for. That's my
And
quick summary review, basically, of
it
how I feel.
it feels different than anything, like, I could say, being a werewolf fan, you should go into it and you can watch it, but I'm not gonna I can't say like, hey, if you like an American Werewolf in London or you like Silver Bullet, then you're gonna love this movie because it does carve its own path. It feels different. It's a period piece. It feels like they put care into this unique story that they wanted to do. There's um anything about werewolves and stuff like that, like anything you're used to seeing of a werewolf biting a person, that type of thing, you don't get really in this movie. Or,
Hmm.
um, you know, you shoot someone with silver and a silver bullet, and they turn back into their human form. You know what I mean? Like all this stuff is really thrown out the window. They took a bunch of unique concepts here. It feels very different. Um, so going into this movie thinking you're going to see just another werewolf movie, it you're pretty far off base because they really take their time to try and add to a lore that has been so established that I think people are almost afraid to do anything different. But you can totally tell. Um, I don't know the director. Do you?
No,
I'm
I didn't do any.
blanking.
I'm just keeping it real basic with you guys here. Like we are, we're not trying to do a big deep dive on this just yet.
Yeah.
We want to see it a few more times. We want to, build our thesis and everything on it, just so that way we can actually give you guys a full blown in depth episode.
Listen, I've watched it one time.
Mhm.
I know everything.
I've
I
only
got
seen
it
it one
covered.
time myself. The director's name is Sean Ellis, though.
Sean
I
Ellis.
did pull it
Okay.
up. Yes.
And he had written it and directed it. And you could
Mhm.
tell like this had to be a singular vision because there had to
Labor of
be
love. Mhm.
yeah, he had a very specific way he wanted to tell the story and what he wanted to add to this lore. And like you said, we're not going to dive too deep into this, but I will say I highly recommend it to a film fan and a werewolf fan. I think
Mhm.
everyone can enjoy this movie.
I think this movie not only challenges the viewer, just in how it presents its story in the time period and the way it holds itself to that, and what it chooses to show and what it chooses not to. But it also, in the sense of what your expectations are for a werewolf movie, I just want to say go in with a completely open mind, because this is a very unique take and it's very welcome to it, because it's just something I've never seen before. So it's that rare feeling of, I watch these fast food werewolf flicks on Tubi or Sci-Fi Channel, and it's, you can pretty much figure out what's going to happen. The sheriff is going to get the gun, he's going to almost die, and he's going to kill the beast, you know what I mean, or he's going to get bit and move away or whatever. With this, it's not that kind of movie. It's more about the characters, and that's something that is always should be number one in any script or any movie at all, is just likable characters bring you in, like as your story's number one, but your characters are number two. Because and I think this movie does a great job with it, because you take a lot of time. It does. You spend a good majority of your time before even any real werewolf action, we would say, comes out, learning who these people are, spending time with them, seeing what their ailments are and what they deal with on a day to day, and just what their baggage is. And it's effective and it works. And it's just basic script writing 101, and it's great to see that it's being honored here.
Yeah, they don't try to make it anything that it's not. They don't do the cheesiness or the little hokey pokey with uh just random effects or anything. They keep it very basic and they stick to the storytelling. And this is a movie like how you're talking about. There's trash out there that you can turn on and you'll never watch it again. It's like, oh, I'll watch it one time and that's it. It's like we've talked about it. We all have our lineups of horror movies that we watch around Halloween, or our very specific horror or werewolf movies that we like to watch. And it's like my setup for favorite werewolf movies has really been the same lineup for years. But I will say The Cursed has definitely made it into that lineup, especially when the Blu-ray comes out. I will be buying it, and then we can probably do our little full-length review on that one.
Yeah, that would definitely. This is definitely one will intend to make a solo episode on, just because. And I mean, there's a lot of these movies that on this list that we're planning on doing solo episodes for. So even if we keep it vague, I know with the older flicks we'll drop some spoilers here and there, but this one is still fresh enough. It's still out there enough. It doesn't have as much of exposure as I'd like it to. So it's like we want to keep at least on this episode, we want to keep things hush hush about it. But I'm gonna say I fully recommend this. I think, if, like Luke said, if you're a film fan or a werewolf movie fan, check this out, because I think that it hits on a lot of levels, and it is something that I know in Chris Stuckman's review, he did say that it was something that he feels that in a few years this is going to be in the conversation. I think that the more people that pick this up, the more it's going to grow. A lot like this past year's The Empty Man, which I
Yeah.
also want to do a show on. I think that, this is something that I feel like these two movies, Scream Factory or somebody will pick it up at some point. It'll get its treatment, and it'll be one of those things that you see online and you're like, I gotta grab that. I gotta add that to my collection.
You know, it may be a little too early to tell, but Sean Ellis, that guy may have carved out a little extra space on the Mount Rushmore of werewolf movies, I
Jeez.
would say.
Well, then
But
I'm
that
excited to really get into this because you're talking really big about it right now. Like I think that's positive. It's rare, it's rare these days that I have a conversation with Luke here, and if it's a movie that came out within the last couple years that he's saying this is fantastic. So usually he's like lukewarm or just kind of that was great, but it's not the all-time pinnacle. So if that tells you anything, this movie has a lot to give.
we gave it a certified fresh here on on the Splattercast.
We did.
But that kind of leads us into our next little topic here of some of our favorite werewolf movies called Full Moon Favorites.
Evil spell. Pentagram. Wolfman. Oh, I'm sick of the whole thing. I'm gonna get out of here.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
So bringing it back here, obviously we talked about American Werewolf in London. This being a huge inspiration to I think all werewolf fans, and just like people who like werewolf movies. But I think we also devised a little list here of a couple of ones that I would say most are that list of like these are great werewolf movies. There are, I would say, really just two that I threw in there that are kind of
Questionable.
Yes, guilty pleasures of mine. But yeah, I mean, like this list here, this is just some of the pinnacle werewolf movies in our opinion. So I think we'll kick it off. We've already talked about American Werewolf in London, but I want you to introduce this one because I know this movie not only had it been near and dear to your heart, just like for me back in the day. You've just the last couple of viewers you were talking last night. You've really, I think, struck a new chord with this film.
Oh, you're talking about Silver Bullet.
Absolutely, Silver Bullet. Definitely one of those ones that's like you're just
The Gary Busey and Corey Haim classic duo.
Oh yeah, let me see here. Sorry, but yes, no, Silver Bullet. I mean, this is Stephen King. Came out in the 80s. It's just one of those things where it's like this is that time period where Stephen King's books are getting made into movies, TV movies, real movies, left and right. And this is based off of a cycle of the werewolf. And I'd say it's similar to the book in certain ways, but they've taken a lot of liberties with it. But I think all for the best. I mean, like they do add characters like Uncle Red and everything that are just one of a kind. I mean, Gary Busey, you said it a little bit ago, like just what a performance in this movie. And I'm being dead serious. Like this is in my opinion, one of those films that I put up there with like Point Break is like peak Gary Busey.
And the world building in this, we talked about it during several tests of this. I was kind of getting on my soapbox about this movie where it is really like, this is one of those films where I can say, I really wish I had more time with a lot of these characters, because I mean, we played that clip earlier with Silver Bullets and Silver Medals, where the gun maker is making he's making the silver bullet, and it's just like that guy's on screen for what, maybe 2 minutes, and it's like I would love to see more with him. Like he makes that whole scene count. I think about it all the time when we're talking about werewolf movies. Just the voiceover of Janie. It's just like that movie's. I don't think it gets enough love. Where it's talking about Gary Busey, like there are just small things that he does. Where yes, he acts a little manic, and Uncle Red is a little nutty, but the relationship he has with Corey Haim's character in that is just like phenomenal, where he goes out of his way to make him the high powered supercharged silver bullet wheelchair. It's just like you could tell there's total love there, but I don't think we get, Gary Busey's kind of in and out of that movie occasionally. It's like I don't think we get enough of that, and that's where it's like, yeah, it's based off Cycle of the Werewolf, which is I know we both have read it, and it's like there was a lot of room to play in kind of adapting that because it was such a sectional kind of book. It wasn't like a normal Stephen King book. So you
I
could
believe
kind of really play.
originally, I believe it was intended to go with a calendar that would have special made art that you can still find online. Thinking about it when we get into our full blown Silver Bullet review down the line here, that is going to be something I want to talk about because I believe this was developed as the story was being developed as a to go along with this calendar. So that's
Yeah.
why you get a an attack every month, obviously with the full moon. So the structure is very different, even though you still go through the year with these characters, and you still go through everything, but it is different. There's definitely some deviations from kills. They change a few of them, they add a few of them. But like I said, all for the better. I think like this is one of those things where it's like the book is a great interpretation, but I also love what the movie did. And I might be a bit biased because obviously the film was something that was introduced to me before the book. The book was only after I got more curious about it and everything that I went back and read it. So
Yeah.
this being my first exposure, I love what they did. Um,
And us talking about, going from Eight for Silver to the Cursed, I love From Cycle of Werewolf to Silver Bullet. I think Silver Bullet is such a great title for a werewolf movie. I was totally on board with it.
yeah, no, I mean like that's not a bad switch off at all. I think that, the only real things I can hit this movie for, if we're talking like points or points deducted, the werewolf suit. It's said 100 times over. It's a little bit goofy looking, especially when it's in towards the end of the film, the third act, when it's in the light as
Yeah.
much as it is. It's definitely a bit there, but I think that the performances and the characters make up for that because you still have a sense of dread for those characters in those moments. It's still uncomfortable. I still remember freaking out as a little kid when Janie looks over in the window and you just see the snout and the eyes there. And it's just
Yes.
like, it's those moments that are good when he's rubbing his hands against things and you see the werewolf hands and all that. I still think there's a lot of effective moments. I mean, you basically have predating Spielberg with the long grass scene from The Lost World with the fog. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
really effective stuff. Doesn't hold up as much, but I can tell you that this is a much better use of a baseball bat in a bar than Halloween Kills, in my opinion.
Oh, you didn't like that? Was it
I didn't.
Huckle?
I
What
don't
was
think
it?
Huckleberry.
Huckleberry, that's what it was. Oh my god.
What's
That
the
was
fucking
perfect.
significance? Yeah, that's for those of you who don't know, we will have a lot to say about the Hollow Green, as the Halloweenies would say, universe. That's
Perfect universe.
we got a lot to say there, but I'm gonna hop off my soapbox of that. Uh let you say your piece here on Silver Bullet. You got any criticisms for it, or is this just one of those movies that
I mean, the werewolf, we'll probably get into it here in a little bit. I don't, because it's been known that they didn't know what they had until well into shooting, and even they weren't happy with it looking the way it was. Um, my biggest criticism with this movie and probably a lot of these werewolf movies, I'll say even to an extent, American Werewolf in London, where the ending is so quick.
yeah.
Where it's like, and in this one, I don't know what it looked like. I don't know if maybe there was a rewrite there in general because I would have loved to have seen this played out longer, but seeing what they were dealing with in terms of the werewolf, I would probably be like, yeah, we're gonna cut this a little bit short and try not to focus too much on this werewolf.
Mhm.
Um, but that is really my only criticism. Where a lot of these movies, once that final battle scene happens, it we're in and out, and I'm like, I would have loved to seen this play out a little bit longer.
Mm.
Really, my only criticism of this movie. It's like I wish I had more time.
No, I
And
agree. I think that's a very fair criticism because it's like it does really end abruptly, and that's something we'll have to touch on in a further exploration into Silver Bullet. But I give it high marks. Highly recommend checking out Silver Bullet if you haven't seen it.
It's a lot of fun, and one thing I do wanna bring up, I don't wanna talk about it too long, but one of my favorite unveilings in anything is Reverend Lowe doing the gardening, and
Mm.
she's looking for a man with an eye patch, and it's unveiled to us, and she still doesn't even know as she's walking past him. I think it's such a perfect unveiling. I get chills every time it happens because I know what's coming. I think it was so well done.
I I watched this movie last night after when I was doing the last of the graphics and everything for the show. Sitting there with my son, he's passed out, infant baby, just passed out on my chest, and I'm watching Silver Bullet and building logos. There's a moment in that movie. I'm only going to mention this just briefly so we can hopefully remember to talk about it after this. Uh, when everybody's leaving to go to the swamp,
Yeah.
and he's trying to stop them. Just I don't know. I've always known that's there, but just like watching that scene, I'm just like, there's so many layers there
Yeah.
to that I don't know and I need to talk to you about. And we will explore it later. But if we want to talk movies that I think very solemnly, werewolf movies that end like don't end so abruptly, because I mean, obviously, like you said, American Werewolf ends abruptly. This one does. They're A+ werewolf films for us. I want to say that the Howling does not leave you hanging that quickly. I think that is a very nice way to end the film. I don't want to like just immediately start at the end, but the fact that you have your confrontation, which I would say is a little underwhelming at the ranch with the barn,
Yeah.
but then
Oh,
they
yeah.
tend to extend that out and they show you what happens back at the news station. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a really clever, funny, and creative way to end that movie.
Yeah, because you don't see anything else like that. A lot of these werewolf movies, you end with that final confrontation, and then we're done. We hit the credits, which American Werewolf in London. I like the way they do that. Um,
It works
but
for them.
like this one, we kind of get that big confrontation, and then we bring it up, and then we kind of bring it back down for a minute, and then we kind of end on a higher note there, and it's like
Exactly.
I think it's very creative. I love it's kind of got that I know They Live happened after the fact, but it reminds me of that where everyone's like watching the TV and stuff like that and it's like, "Oh, that just happened," and it
Mhm.
kind of ends a little bit on that comedy, and then we cut to the bar. Um with the pepper steak and the rare
Mhm.
burger or whatever. I think it's all fun.
Yeah,
It's so well
exactly.
put together. And like that one, um, that I like because obviously in prep for this, I was watching. The last thing that I had watched before us recording was American Werewolf in London, just to kind of watch it one more time. And I'll say that movie and The Howling is like I like it because a lot of the werewolf movies kind of end where it's the werewolf, the final confrontation is a werewolf and either like one or two people, where it's like American Werewolf in London and The Howling, it ends with a transformation in front of a bunch of people. And I like that to kind of be like, oh, well, yep, this is real.
Yeah.
Werewolves are real, you
Yeah,
know?
you gotta go on with the rest of your life knowing that. And I think the thing that's brilliant with Joe Dante's take on this, as to where like American Werewolf, I don't think there's any way you can escape that. Piccadilly Circus, that's
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, even in a pre-internet age, that's everywhere. Like people are gonna find out about that. Um, with this, I love that you have naysayers. You have people who are like, oh, it's just some Hollywood trick or whatever,
Yeah.
talking about it. So it's like the fact that it's on TV, there's already going to be people, saying, oh, that's just a joke or that's that was set up. Like the same thing we're dealing with if you want to like date ourselves, God knows, this will probably get posted in a week or two. But, with the Will Smith situation at the
Oh,
Oscars,
yeah.
how there's so many people saying that's a prank, that's a joke, you know what I mean? That's something that they set up. And it's like, I don't know, like it's just weird to see like a situation like that being juxtaposed with this movie
Yeah.
and just how it's like, he was very smart to say, it's not like everybody is going to be like, holy shit, werewolves exist. There's going to be naysayers.
Yeah.
And like it grounds this movie. And I think that this, for being what it is, still holds itself down to being very grounded. I think that it opens so beautifully in this different kind of way where they're tracking a serial killer, and we meet our main character, and she's a reporter, and she's meeting with this serial killer who we don't know at the time is a werewolf. I don't know what it is about werewolf movies in 1981 and these slimy porno theaters that they like going to,
Yeah,
because they do the
I was
same
like,
thing
what's
here.
happening here?
But it's one of those things where it's like they really take the time to set him up. I think it's Eddie Twisk or Twist.
Eddie Quist.
Eddie Quisk. Yeah, I did not watch this in preparation for our show. I didn't get around to it, but it is one that I've seen a dozen times. So I kind of have a good recollection of it. But it is where you get to live in his psyche a little bit, at the start of this film, and you really get to see what's going on with him. And I love the investigation. I love how basically everything shakes out in this movie. I think it might be a tad far-fetched. I mean, maybe not. They do kind of set it as that they're having marital issues, but that this guy would just go to this retreat with his wife and just start banging this chick in the woods. But I think he had already been bitten by that point. So, it's just one of those things where it's like, I think that's a little, that storyline there is a little bit of one of those things where I'm like, okay, it's kind of taking the easy route of just making him unfaithful and everything, and just making that his excuse to falling to the dark side, if you say. But I think that like everything else in this movie is handled beautifully. I love the characters. I love the fellow reporters that come down. Oh my god, and I'm so sorry. He works with Joe Dante all the time. You know what actor I'm talking about. He works in the store. He gives the guy the bullets, or the guy comes and takes the bullets from him. He's in Gremlin.
Miller. What's
Victor?
his name?
No, it's not Victor Miller.
It is. Oh my god, why am I forgetting his name?
I'm pulling it up too. We'll get there, guys.
He just passed away. Dick Miller.
Miller.
Right?
Dick Miller.
Fantastic. I wanted to say
If
Dick Miller, and then I was like, I don't know where my head's going, so I didn't want to commit to it.
If we're talking, as far as actors go, as like if we're talking about Gary Busey and the Silver Bullet, Dick Miller, small part, memorable as hell. I love him. I love everything he said. That whole sequence of him going through the bookstore and like giving him the lowdown on the werewolves and everything, perfect. Howling gets high marks for me as well. This is one of those ones that I've never not loved this movie.
Yeah, and this is one I think we had talked about it, I think yesterday, where we were kind of doing a little test here where I wasn't watching The Howling my first go around. I was like, it's not bad. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. It wasn't like one of my favorites, but in prepping for this podcast, I watched a couple times and I was like, this is a pretty good movie. Especially considering it came out in 1981, where it's like, they weren't using so many werewolf movies use groundwork for like, American Werewolf in London things. This was just their thought, well, I know it's based on a book, but from my understanding is the movie varies pretty heavily from the actual book itself, which is something I definitely want to look at and read, because it's like, my criticism for this film is probably the Eddie Quist character in itself, where it's like, I don't think we get enough of him. He's just kind of there and then murdered, and then, kind of comes back later on, where it's like, and I don't know what the book holds in that, but it would be so interesting because, I don't think they touch on it fully, but that the female main character is raped by Eddie Quist, and I think it would have been so interesting to see him kind of get away and to him continuing serial killings, and her being pregnant by a werewolf, and so it's like her kind of dealing with that whole thing while there's another serial killer, and then you can kind of have the whole, how like Cronenberg's The Fly, where he found out she was pregnant and felt like, he wanted the baby. So it'd be like, almost like Eddie Quist wants the baby. And I don't know if this is how the book goes. Maybe it does. But I think looking at these movies here, I see the kind of potential that it could have. And it's like, I don't know necessarily if going to the colony and kind of going with that aspect of everything was the right call when you could have really dove into like the psychological stuff of the groundwork that they lay at the beginning. You know, it's like just some minor changes could have led to a very different film.
All right, we're remaking it.
There
But
we go.
just to save on some time's sake, because we could probably spend a lot of time in our full moon favorites here. But since we have a few other topics, I think we should probably gun through these next couple pretty quickly. Like I said, any of these could pop back up as a full show, but I would say these top three we definitely wanted to cover on this show. I would say for this episode specifically, because you're looking at, with Silver Bullet maybe being a little bit higher on our charts, but I don't think so. I think a lot of people who are werewolf enthusiasts respect that movie. I think these three are some of the best examples you're going to get as, really they took an attempt, they went for it. And I think they really work as far as, being excellent werewolf movies and movies in general.
And that's always a toss-up. I mean, like, I feel like it's very hard to fire on all cylinders in a werewolf movie because there's so many variables there where it's like, you could have a good story, but, the acting is lame or you're too gory and it turns people off. There's so many different variables in there. But I will say probably one of the biggest variables in a lot of these films is the actual werewolves themselves and the CGI that goes along with it, which can lead us in to our next topic, creatures features.
What the hell's going on here?
Some kind of animal, sir.
Nothing gets you going like a head rolling, huh?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's just one of my favorite scenes from American Werewolf. I think like just the reveal finally in all its glory. No shadows, no nothing. This was definitely a tough one to clip out. I wanted to be clever and cool, but I just figured, why not unveil the greatest werewolf look put to cinematic, put to cinema, in my opinion. Obviously, if you look at my background, I have a ton of American Werewolf merch and things like that. It's a movie that has inspired me greatly. And I think that this is, in my opinion, if we're talking some of the greatest creature effects or creature, feature looking things, it's American Werewolf in London for me. I think that they hit the nail on the head for the scariest and most demon werewolf looking thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's still terrifying even to this day. Even like watching it in preparation for this, it's so unsettling to see the werewolf itself kind of on all fours going through Piccadilly Circus. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh gosh, this thing is like very scary, and it's very weird because it's like it's terrifying, but I kind of want to pet him. You know what I mean? Where it's like he looks like almost like dog enough that it's like, well, I don't know, maybe I could, So I think that they had that perfect realism and also adding the terrifyingness of it, I guess. And I would say like the great thing about these 80s movies is that CGI wasn't really a thing. So it's like me and you are both, practical all day. So it's like um the films in a sense can be dated, but they don't get dated like CGI gets dated. Like the sci-fi movies, those are dated. Like they're dated a year after they come out, where it's like I can watch Silver Bullet, and yes, it looks questionable and a little, that ending scene, but the rest of the movie for me is really strong because they're hiding certain things, they're kind of building suspense, and those movies for me are more timeless than a lot of the things that pop up nowadays.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we're talking just, creature effects and things like that, I want to throw it back to the OG here, talking about the Wolfman and just how it all started from here. I mean, really, werewolves were a thing that we were known in folklore and things like that. But this is your first real cinematic attempt at bringing a werewolf onto the big screen. And I mean, this is one of those things where it's like it all starts from here. You do not get American Werewolf in London or The Howling or even, I would say, Dog Soldiers unless you get this movie. And I think like the reason I wanted to highlight it in this segment is just because you're looking at the very first attempt of a werewolf transformation and just, you know, the just werewolf design where it's not uber complex. It's not this this complete beast that you see in these other films that were in the 80s. It's a man who, you know, just grows some fur and fangs and a different looking snout and claws, and that's what they could do. But I still think, you know, as a film, it's still respectable. It's still something I think if you're a werewolf enthusiast, you should definitely watch because it is the genesis of all this lore and all these things that you hear about werewolves and silver and everything. This is where it starts and where it comes into cinema for the very first time.
And this is where, you know, I think me and you have talked about it, where I prefer my werewolves on all fours.
Mhm.
You know, I like that animalistic approach. I've had this discussion a few times in my everyday life, which is very odd, I guess, in a sense. But um, where, you know, I always feel like a werewolf should be on all fours, except it's like a bear where they can stand on their hinds, but it's only for a short period of time. So, like, you
Mhm.
know, if they're fighting or something, I get it. But like the Wolfman for me, the original Wolfman is absolutely iconic. Like him walking through the fog. It's just one of those scenes that's ingrained in your head, not just for werewolves, but in cinema, I think. Um, you know, because we always watch, like I talked about earlier, certain things for Halloween. I love to put on the original, The Wolfman, just because it really has that feel to it and just his look in general. You know, the NECA figures just came out, and it's like,
Mhm. I got it right
just,
over here.
and just his look is I'm obsessed with it. Like, I want the mask of the Wolfman, the Universal Monsters Wolfman mask. You know, it's just like that look is so iconic. And, you know, we talk about that American Werewolf in London transformation, where it's like you look at the Wolfman, uh, since we were born post American Werewolf in London, I feel like that's the kind of the tent pole that's been planted where it's like that's the standard for werewolves, where I feel like probably the Wolfman before that was probably like, yeah, it looks basic to us now, but at that time was probably like, oh man, they did the transformation on on camera there. You know what I mean? And it's like one minute he's a man, next minute they do the small transition and he's full on Wolfman. It's like just absolutely iconic.
Yeah, and I mean, not nearly as painful in this
Yep.
variant as we would get later on, which I think is an essential thing to werewolves now is just pain and associating that with just body like transforming and mutating, which I kind of want to segue this into a movie that you recommended on here that I did end up watching before the podcast and I hadn't seen in many years. And I'm talking about Ginger Snaps because if you want to talk about a werewolf movie that associates with your body changing and everything, this movie associating with female puberty is just a genius idea. And I sat down and I watched this movie and I thought, this is the most 90s movie I've ever fucking seen in my life. But damn, is it effective? Like it is a really solid werewolf flick.
Yeah, and it brings something different. This is where I'm talking
Mhm.
about where, you know, The Cursed, I feel like is a real film, and sometimes these films just kind of bring in, I'm making a werewolf movie, but just with a different set of characters, you know, and it's like, I think Ginger Snaps is one of those, but I think it adds a talking point up until that point that wasn't really ever talked about, where it's like, um, up until then, I think I what a lot of the females in these movies were just damsels in distress in a certain point. You know, they weren't really going through that change. So for Ginger Snaps to bring that new dynamic here really adds a lot into the werewolf genre. And I think they marry it perfectly.
Yes.
It's something where um, it feels way different. Like in here, like you're saying, yes, it is a very, very 90s movie, but I think that adds to the charm of this movie where it's like, when we're watching the 80s movies, it's like the 80s adds to it, and 90s became the toss up where it was like, you're either in or you're out. Some of them are good 90s, some of them are very bad 90s. I think Ginger Snaps falls into that very good 90s that adds into a lot of the storytelling in the time period.
Yeah, and I think it's a very unique look for the werewolf too, and it really takes its time to get you there.
Yeah.
I mean, just the taping of the tail and things like that. It's more uncomfortable, and it's such a longer period of time than what you would see even in like American Werewolf in London, where they kind of glorify it in a sense where he feels energetic, he feels, like the benefits of it, as to where
Yeah.
she is not feeling any of the benefits really at the end of the day. And I think it's really unique and it's really cool just how they handle all of it. I haven't seen any of the sequels, but I hear they're not great.
Yeah, I started the sequel, the second one, and I just could not get into it after because I tried to watch it right after watching Ginger Snaps, and I was just like, this is
Mhm.
not even close to being what I had originally watched with the first one.
Yeah, and I love because I watched this with my wife and my sister because I was doing logos and putting it on, and it's usually one of those situations where my wife is just like, turn this junk off, like let's watch our show or something, whatever we're watching at that time. But she was just so taken aback by the opening couple of minutes of this movie that she was just like, the fuck is going on here? And then I'm like, oh, it's a werewolf movie. And we watched the whole thing. And she was just like, oh, so she gave that guy STDs and he turned into a werewolf. I'm like, kinda. It's like a, analogy for that. I take it. So it's just like there's a lot of layers to this movie that I think are very unique and very cool. And it's something I do plan on revisiting again. It's something that was just very much on its own island, like you were saying, where it's just kind of like it has its own brand to it that is very unique. And
Yeah.
it is definitely worth a look and a very different kind of werewolf. Um, I'm gonna segue this into this next one here because I don't I know you're not gonna have much to add to this one. This is definitely a me thing. But because we were talking about how you never really see like a female werewolf or anything, especially at that time, uh Beast of Bray Road, it has a female werewolf, and it's a mystery the whole time of who the
Oh,
werewolf is in town and everything. And you find out who it is, and it's female, and it's this is that fast food sci-fi garbage right here. This is that. I think you said you watched what, like 5-10 minutes of it.
I think about 10 minutes.
It's not great, and I mean you could see I could only find this as the poster for the background. That I couldn't find a legit poster that would size right,
You're
and this was
telling me
it.
there isn't a Scream Factory release for Beast of
No,
Bray Road?
no, I wish there was though because I want to find out more about this movie. But God, this movie is terrible, but it scared the living shit out of me when I was a kid. Like just this werewolf design, but I still give it some marks because again, it's in that time, it's in that period where it's early 2000s and it's low budget as shit, but they needed to use practical effects and they do. And I think the werewolf looks great. I think, for what they had, the budget it's great. As far as acting, production, story-wise, it's all really C and D tier,
Yeah.
but I still think there's enjoyment in this movie. I might be totally biased because I love and have nostalgia for this film, but I think it's one of those things where if we're talking about like the like creature features, like just in general, like the look and design of a werewolf movie, this is a movie that had to compromise in everywhere it could except the practical effects. And as a horror fan who just, like I said, I like my fast food garbage sometimes. That's all I'm looking for is that effort. And you give me some good gore and you give me some, basic ass storyline, and I will take it and I will run with it. And I will admit, I have watched this movie probably north of 10 times in my life. And, it's just one that I revisit every couple years. It's always on Tubi. It's always available on there. So it's like you can even watch it for free on YouTube. I know I watched it there one time, but like it's just one that I had to highlight for myself as far as just werewolf movies. I don't think they get out there much, but I still think in this section it works because the effects are top notch.
And that's where it's like, yeah, I only watched about 10 minutes of it, and I'll say, yeah, the acting, production-wise, it was very questionable. I got through the first kill, and I'll say, like, from what I had seen, I would, because we're at that point where it's like you can easily pick out a shitty werewolf, where it's like as soon as it pops up on screen. And I'll say I was not disappointed from what I had seen from the werewolf itself. It was just like getting up to that point for me was a chore. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue this. Um, but like, I think like what you're saying is, well, we're both in agreement, as we've talked about previously in horror, where it's practical as CGI is a kind of the complement of it. It shouldn't be straight CGI. So it's like I think the more practical you go, the better it's going to age.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, uh, and that's the one thing where I know we were talking about, you know, uh, maybe sometimes crazy horror fans decide they want to make a werewolf movie, and it's like the more gore, the better. But I think what we do get from there is, I think a lot of horror fans are in agreement, where it's like since a lot of people grew up in practical effects, that's where a lot of people want to go with it instead of trying to just throw CGI at it because it's cheaper and easier. So it's like I think Beast of Bray Road kind of it was made with the best of intentions, I feel. You know what I mean? Where it's like, if there's one thing we're gonna do right, we gotta have a good werewolf.
Absolutely. They dedicate it to the state of Wyoming where this whole narrative takes place too. Where because it's based off of a legend over there of the Beast of Bray Road. It's not
Oh,
just, yeah,
okay.
so it's got some lore to it. It's got a little bit of folk tales.
It's got a little teeth to it, as they
Yes,
say.
it does. It does. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think as far as to kind of wrap this section up, I mean, just creatures features like these are some of the ones that I wanted to highlight here and saying they did a bang up job. I mean, I'll even say that just highlighting them here really quick just to get them out. I think late phases. A movie we'll probably discuss a little bit more here in our following sections.
Great
Uh,
concept.
a great concept, very unique movie, one of the better werewolf films in the last 10 years. Um, Also, very unique looking werewolves, very unique take. Again, a practical look at these
Yeah.
werewolves. Really fantastic. Bad Moon, one that has been highlighted by a lot of people, strangely, love this movie. But then also a lot of people are like, oh, this movie is kind of whatever to me. But I think again, practical werewolf handled really well. Story wise, it's kind of pick your poison if you like this kind of thing, in my opinion. I mean, how do you feel about Bad Moon in this sense?
In story wise, I feel like it was flawed from the beginning. Where the again, it's based off a book, and the book is told from the dog's point of view. So they tried to do that in a sense. I think they kind of, I honestly, I think you should have just been like, okay, that's a good starting point, but let's move past that instead of trying to make the dog a focus in any sense. Where it's like, okay, just have him there if you want it, but especially with the ending, I think you try to make him too much of a focus, and it kind of loses steam because you can't tell a story from a dog's point of view really like that
Mm,
successfully. So for me, it's like I think that story was flawed in a sense. Great looking werewolf, I think.
mm,
Um, but I wasn't sold on the concept. I think again, missed potential there, where it's like um the werewolf, you're kind of put that werewolf in Silver Bullet. And I think
yeah,
Silver Bullet is, like, one of the perfect werewolf movies, you know what I mean? Where
absolutely.
it's like
I would love that because I mean, you get this is a mid to late '90s film, I
yep,
believe. So it's one of those things where it's like you get they've learned a little bit from here on how to do a practical werewolf, and this had a little bit of some studio money behind it. So it's one of those things where they could get away with doing an excellent werewolf.
yep.
I don't know what the hell was going on with. I believe it was Dino De Laurentiis on Silver Bullet, where the fuck all the money went, and why the werewolf didn't look better. But
They're
the
like, "It
last
just
one that
disappeared.
the
Here's a
last
parachute."
one that I want to highlight as far as if we're talking, look and we're talking all that, if it wants to load here, is going to be the Wolfman. The remake of the Wolfman. Again, it's a combination of CGI and practical effects, but where the practical effects are and when they play out, I think they're stunning. I think they're phenomenal. I think this is a fantastic update as far as a look goes to the Wolfman's design. It's terrifying. It's gritty. It's violent. The long claws. I love it. I want a redo. I want an Ultimate NECA figure of this rendition. I think it's a very dangerous looking werewolf. Again, like with Bad Moon, the movie loses it as far as its presentation concept. What's going on. It doesn't meet all those expectations, which is very unfortunate because it's a great cast. And again, there was money there. They brought Rick Baker in to do these werewolf effects, and they look insane and they're amazing. But the substance just isn't there.
Yeah, and
All
that
bread.
was. I don't remember this one that well because I remember being so hyped up when it first came out and, hearing all the delays and stuff like that. Because it was like, at this point in time, I remember really getting into a lot of my horror stuff, where it was like, and I knew Freddy's, Jason's, things like that. But then at this point, I was really getting into the Burning and Sleepaway Camp and all your offshoot horror that, you kind of have to be really in the horror game to know about, where it's like, oh, that's great that you know this, but have you seen that? So I was really pumped for the Wolfman to come out at that point, and then it was getting delays, and you were hearing all these questionable things coming out about it. And I remember watching it, and I don't remember that much about it, but I was really pleased with the way the werewolf looked during the big battles and stuff like that. It's one I do have to revisit just because I meant to. I had the best intentions of getting around to watching it for this one. It just never worked out. So it's like one of those ones where I was excited that we're putting money behind a horror property like that. And then, I don't know, it just seemed like it kind of fizzled.
I agree. But I think we've spent some time in Creatures Features. I think we've gotten to talk about at least every werewolf film we wanted to highlight, at least from the looks wise and the special effects and bringing it there. Luke, I think it's time we transition into our next topic here, if you want to give us an introduction.
Yeah, because we have all these great werewolves. But before you can get the werewolves, you have to start somewhere. So let's talk about some of the greatest transformations in Hair of the Dog.
Now, I'm really sorry to be upsetting you, but I have to warn you.
Warn me?
We were attacked by a werewolf.
I'm not listening to this.
On the moors. We were attacked by a lycanthrope. A werewolf. I was murdered. An unnatural death. And now I walk the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted.
Shut up.
The wolf's bloodline must be severed. The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David.
So we've talked at length already about this American Werewolf transformation. I think it goes without saying that might be the greatest transformation in cinematic werewolf history, if you want to talk about it like that. I would really like to discuss the transformation scene or I want to say the detransformation scene in Silver Bullet. I think that's a really unique way of doing that, and coming off of it being a post-American Werewolf film, I think it's a really unique take. And it's unfortunate that the ending of this movie is so abrupt, because that's one of the last big set pieces that you get. And seeing Reverend Lowe transform back into a human. But if there's any movie on here that I'm gonna highlight under that, I know a lot of people would say the safe bet's The Howling. I'm gonna go with Silver Bullet on this one and say that that's probably my favorite and or the best de-transformation scene other than American Werewolf.
Yeah, and this one I really like too. Again, my dad was very into Stephen King, so I grew up watching a lot of Stephen King movies, and like this one, those close-ups of the hair are like receding back into his pores. Is something that's always been stuck in my head. And to see the Reverend there with, two eyes shot out, you know what I mean? Like, it's just so iconic to me. And even when he's turning, when the sheriff goes in and notices the car and everything, and Reverend Lowe's there, and he's got the 5 o'clock shadow. He looks all dirty, and then he hits him in the head, and he starts changing right there. Um, I I think we only get a little glimpse of it, but for me, I think that is something that is also stuck in my head in terms of transformation. Um, because like the one big thing about American Werewolf is like that one, and I think to an extent, even Silver Bullet does and does well, is the look of pain on their faces while they're transforming. Because it's like I think John Landis had said he felt like it would be more pain. It would have to hurt to transform. Whereas something like The Howling, I'm not a huge fan of, because when Eddie Quist is transforming, it sometimes a lot of these films go with rage, and it's like I don't think you would really be feeling rage at that point in time when your bone structure is changing and hair is growing. I feel like you would be in so much pain, you wouldn't really be able to feel that. Like, Bad Moon is one of the most notable for probably one of the worst transformations ever with the CGI that they did. And he keeps calling, I think he keeps calling his sister a bitch during that and stuff. And
Yeah, he
it's like,
does. He's insulting the shit out of her.
and it's like I don't for me that's not believable. I know we're talking about werewolves, but it's just like, in terms of transformation, I don't think in terms of realism that's how that would go. So, and I think I need pain in my transformations more so than rage.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key factor to it that gets added in, like we said with the Wolfman, where it seems very painless. And that I think like once you brought that in, it never left. I think like most werewolf media describes it as being a painful transformation, because why wouldn't it be? Like why wouldn't this act of you turning into a complete different beast, an animal, be different? I think you know since I've kind of highlighted my favorite right now of what I was saying, I can highlight, I think, one of the worst. Like you said, Bad Moon's pretty bad. They went the CG route with this Werewolf or Wolfman remake, and I think it's just awful. I think like you see Benicio del Toro's big CGI, and like I literally not CGI, but like it's just it's disappointing, especially coming from a production that Rick Baker's working on. Like this is a big budget movie for 2010, and like the fact that it's just glossed over with CGI for a transformation is just pitiful. It's just unfortunate, and they do it, I think, twice in the movie, because you'll see his hands expand, and it's obviously computer generated effects, and it's unfortunate, and it's just really upsetting, because it's like
And
you could have really brought it home and made it at least where I could have been saying the story's pretty generic, but damn, the werewolf effects, not only are they good, but the transformations are excellent.
and that's where it's like, it's so reflective of the changing of the times, where just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like, hey, we have enough money. It's more convenient to do a CGI instead of really take our time with the practical effects. Because with the right backing and having Rick Baker there, just to be able to dedicate time, it could have been one of the best transformations if they would have went a practical route with a little CGI sprinkled on in there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the toss up we get now, where it's like a bad transformation, too much CGI can really take you out of a good werewolf movie.
I agree. And I mean, that's one of the things that like it's almost an expectation at this point for any werewolf content and media. And it's a reason why we have this topic here, is because it's like, if we're talking about issues with, the current state of werewolf films, it's just like that is an expectation. That is a mark that it's a box you have to check, I think, in each one of these. If you have a lackluster werewolf transformation, then it's kind of takes away, kind of robs the audience, I feel like, of some of the experience they're paying to see. You know what I mean? It's like I don't blame them for what they do, but for in certain things, but I'm gonna I'm gonna say full bias if you want here. I think this movie right here tries a lot harder with its werewolf transformation than some of the stuff we see in the Wolfman, and that's pretty sad to say. I think they cheat a little bit in Beast of Bray Road, but still, I think that they try a little bit harder in that movie. But I think that's pretty much everything I have there. Do you have, other than of course the American Werewolf, do you have any kind of would you say runner up or favorite transformation in any werewolf media?
My runner up, you know, I honestly just think American Werewolf is the standard bearer, where it's like everyone else is okay in a sense, but it's just not something where it is necessarily can be talked about, because it's like John Landis and the team just knocked it out. Like they had the right concept with it, and that's where I think it does become intimidating in a sense, where it's like it was perfect right out of the gate. So what else can we add to this?
Hmm.
Because like you're saying, where they do take that kind of pain that John Lane has added to the transformation, it seems like everything is just inspired by now. Because I mean, what else can you do? Like no one has went to the full length of what he's done in terms of the set pieces to create that transformation are just absolutely insane. When you watch documentaries, you see how many different prosthetics they had to use, and just the extended body alone, where he's laying on the ground, is just like it's a bold move to kind of go that in depth with the transformation scene, because a lot of people just want to shy away from it because it's like, show a little bit, cut, show a little bit, cut, where it's like, nope, we're going to stay on a lot of this and kind of really get in depth, and it's a bold move.
Absolutely. But I think that about wraps it up as far as Hair of the Dog. So do you want to take us into our next segment here?
Oh yeah, well, as these transformations are happening and these werewolves are running around, well, I guess these bodies are stacking up. So I guess someone better call the Harmony Hills funeral services.
Dare to do that? Why don't you go out to Harmony Hill, Sheriff Heller, and dig up what's left of my boy Brady and explain to him about private justice? Would you want to do that?
One of those fantastic scenes that we needed to highlight here on the show. For
I tell you, the
Silver
more we
Bullet.
play these clips, the more we've got to talk about Silver Bullet as a whole.
It's coming down the pipeline. I think it is something that I've seen it getting a lot more love. And I mean, if we're talking kills, we're talking favorite kills, werewolf movies, or we're talking gold standards for that. Silver Bullet's great. I think they have a lot of really great visceral set pieces. I mean, I things that spring to mind are even the first opening kill with Arnie, is it?
I think it's what it is. Arnie or Artie, I can't remember.
One of
what
them
exactly.
getting his head lopped off. Like that's a very intense sequence. Everything from that to the sequence in the bedroom with the woman who's pregnant.
What? Oh man,
Yeah.
man, like I don't want to turn this into a Silver Bullet podcast, but just like that whole thing of she's pregnant, gonna commit suicide. The werewolf, legitimately, like reading Cycle the Werewolf. There's a thing in there where I believe someone's looking outside and they see the eyes of the werewolf. And, being on the second floor of a house, and in general, that's how they play it, where it's like, if you're not on the ground floor, you're pretty safe. But like just the claw going up the house, and him climbing up to that second floor and jumping through the window is absolutely terrifying, because it's like, again, you think you're safe on the second floor, but nope, he's climbing up there to get you. I think it's just perfect.
Absolutely. Other than that, I can highlight on this one, again, going back to the Wolfman, I think the gypsy camp scene is pretty epic stuff. I think that that whole play out is pretty awesome. I think it's where you get the best melding of the practical and CG effects that you're going to get in that film. And I think that it's pretty visceral and it doesn't hold back at all with some of the gore and some of the violence. And it just really sticks out in my mind. But if I'm going absolute favorite on my end of things, it's obviously Jack getting attacked on the moors. I mean, what a scene. Like what a just how they approach it with the fake out of David slipping. Are you going to help me up or what? And then just this silent beast just coming out of the corner, and then it's just that screaming from Jack is just what really sells that for me.
Yeah.
And just the horror of that scene and just how, they cut back to David running and we keep cutting back. And every time we see Jack, there's more blood, there's more gore and entrails, things like that around him until the werewolf breaks away and then he's just left there dead.
And in such a crazy way to start, it's like it really sets the bar for that film to go as to and we're talking about you already played a clip of it, like the mayhem in Piccadilly Circus of all that going down for me is one of my absolute favorites because it's like
Mhm.
such a culmination of okay, now we're really letting him loose and he's just gonna wreak havoc everywhere. So like that one is one of my I think kind of building and building and building because like we said, American Werewolf in London doesn't really it does some close-ups, but it really doesn't harp too much on, the killing. It kinda cuts a lot of times. Like the chase scene in what is it, the subway?
Mhm.
I think is one of my favorites, just kinda cat and mouse kinda games, and especially when you kinda see him on the escalator and the werewolf kinda coming into frame, I is one of my absolute favorites, and as they do the camera point of view, I think is perfect, and, I think that film is effective because they don't harp too much on the actual killings itself, but when they show back up with, the kind of aftermath of what the werewolf did to them, I think it's like, "Oh, man," so it kinda lets your mind kinda wander as to what exactly how that all played out, and,
It makes you
um,
sit with it.
I think that's part of effective filmmaking.
Yeah, I agree. It makes you sit with it, and it makes you see every little uncomfortable detail. I think one of the pieces in that clip I played for one of our previous segments there was just there's a piece of flesh that dangles on Jack's neck that just always, ever since they pointed it out in that behind the scenes documentary they have, that's just stuck with me. Every time I see it, it's just that gross little piece of dangling flesh. And yeah, I mean, like as far as those go, those are probably some of the best. Again, American Werewolf takes top boy here with some of those kills. They did not hold back, but I think Silver Bullet has a lot to offer as well. I
It
also think Late Phases has a lot of great kills as well.
and to go to Silver Bullet, um, I really do love the scene where they all do go out into the woods to hunt down the werewolf. Um, one of mine that's almost like jarring is where the one guy gets taken under the fog and he comes up and his like eye is like bulging out, and I love that type of stuff of them just getting mowed down from under the fog. I think it's fun, and even the hokiness of him hitting him with the ball bat and then it changed to the werewolf's hand as he's like smacking him into the fog. I think that's hilarious.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then oh man, I lost my train of thought on that. But
Mm.
again, one of my other ones where we don't really see it, but you kind of let your imagination run wild is the Brady scene,
Oh yeah.
with the kite drenched in blood. I think that's so effective to kind of think what exactly happened, and we never really do see it. We just see the father's reaction to what he is seeing in the little gazebo, and it's
He
just
was
like
torn to pieces. And everything.
exactly. I think it's so effective. And another one, just to bring up the Howling, where it's not necessarily the killing, but like to see the undead Eddie Quist as they said the line was improvised. I don't know if it was, where he had been shot in the head and he kind of pulls out the bullet and says, "Let me give you a piece of my mind." I think it's just so unsettling where it's not a kill, but it's just one of those like the aftermath of a kill that wasn't even a werewolf kill. It was just he got shot. Is again one of the things where it's like I think there was so much missed potential there. Just because he plays that role so well that you can't take your eyes off him while he's delivering dialogue.
No, I agree. But that about, I think, wraps it up for this segment here as far as the funeral service. I think those are a couple of really unfortunate characters that we got to pick up there. I think we should bring this thing home and kind of bring it into our last topic here, if you want to take us away there, Luke.
Yeah, well, I guess that's enough of us paying our respects at Harmony Hills. But as we're walking out, we should beware the moon.
It's a full moon. Beware the moon and stick to the road. Oops.
So kind of coming into this segment here, we are reaching the final chapter, if you will. But it's never the final chapter, but at least of this show, it is our final chapter. Beware the moon. This is kind of going over one of the big aspects, I think, when we talk notes here was the atmosphere of these movies and just kind of, what do we think is where do we it's a segment that we think that a lot of these werewolf movies that have come after some of these greats really miss the mark. I mean, like, you pull it back to everything, even going back to the Wolfman. I think that sense of atmosphere in that movie is really heavy and carries into not only Wolfman movies to go forward, but just horror in general with any of these Universal Monsters movies. I mean, one of the best examples I can say that's completely off of this topic is Friday the 13th Part 6 really takes a lot of inspiration from these movies. And I think, like, if you can't nail a good atmosphere, if you can't, because that's really where I think a lot of the genuine horror comes from with these movies, is because it is that sense of whether you're in a small town that's being terrorized by a monster or you're in the forest, camping with a loved one. And, it's just like a movie like this, a werewolf film, to really get under your skin, has to nail the atmosphere and has to really, nail that and make that work. Because if it doesn't, then, I mean, you really can only fall back on, your kills and your effects. But, that's only going to go so far. If you really want to scare somebody, I think the atmosphere is one of the major things you need to nail in a werewolf film.
And I kind of raked it over the coals earlier for its transformation scene, but I think one of the films that does this best is Bad Moon, where they kind of, it's supposed to take place in Oregon, which I think is really Toronto, but it's just
Always.
it just the openings of that, the mountaininess in the forest of it, I just think, like, as soon as that film opens up, it's like, I would love to live there. It's like it just seems so homey. And just the dynamic of, the uncle living in the backyard and then the camaraderie of him and the nephew, I think is so well done. It's just like there was so much to build on there where they did miss the mark a little bit, but I think the atmosphere of that they really nailed. Because it's just something, it's hard to, if you can't establish a great atmosphere, it kind of immediately takes you out of the movie. But with them, I think they were able to nail it, and it kind of, it feels real in a sense.
I agree 100%. I think that, they do nail the atmosphere in that film. I think, like, just the way the wolf looks and the way the creature is and how it interacts in its environment is huge. Those woods seem ever expansive in that movie.
Yes.
And you just see so many people in these situations, like even to the when they're not near the home, but it's the what is he, the electrician or whatever at the beginning of the film, who is who's murdered pretty early on.
Yeah.
just really scary
Yeah, and he
shit,
gets
man.
attacked.
Like that really does unsettle me. You know what I mean? Like I think that's good. I think you can put that relation in with the Howling as well, just the way they use the forest and everything. And
Yeah.
I think one of
Where
the
it's, like,
great
kind of
things.
an isolation, but homey feel in a sense. I don't know, it's weird to explain where it's like at
Mhm.
one minute you're at home and the next minute you can easily be isolated in the woods.
Yeah, I mean, like, and that's the thing about the forest and the woods in general is I think you get that sense of, we're just visitors. Like this is not our domain. You know what I mean? It's kind
Yep.
of like hopping in the ocean. It's like you're just a visitor there. Like you are stepping into something else's territory and home. And I think that like most of the movies we talked about on here definitely really hit that spot. They really hit that spot of a tone that works. I would say, with the exception of the Wolfman 2010, I think that one is very mixed in the way it's told, but I think a lot of that comes to just being pulled out of there. And then Beast of Bray Road is again, they're not really going for a specific tone. I guess they're going for a more small town stuff, but they just, other than you see the bar and the woods, and that's about it. You get the police station, so it's one of those things where they don't really set that very well.
It
It's the forest looks like a set or looks like someone's backyard most of the time, so it's like you don't get that kind of thing you're looking for, I would say.
in a movie I'll bring up that, I wrestle with all the time, I know you're a big fan of, is The Wolf of Snow Hollow,
Mhm.
where it's like, I think the atmosphere there is absolutely perfect. I think that movie has its own problems, but atmosphere is not one of them. Like, I think, I don't know, maybe it's a Stranger Things culture or whatever, but, the small town atmosphere, I think, is absolutely perfect for a werewolf tale. It's like,
Absolutely.
um, we've talked about it. Is a werewolf good in a movie, or is it better in a long-standing series? And it's like, I think with a series, you kind of get to build that small town atmosphere a little better. And I think that's really what you need to make those kills count, because I know I'm not a fan of it. I don't know where you stand on it, where it's like, I don't think you need to be, I don't think it should be just because you're a werewolf movie, you throw gore at it, because I think that discredits the story in a sense. So it's like the more meaning you have and the more storytelling you have with these characters, you cannot really harp on the gore, but more so on the importance of the deaths themselves. And I think you really need that in a small town. Again, I know I've been riding Silver Bullet this whole podcast, but I think they do it so well.
Absolutely. And I think not trying to just shout out American Werewolf here again, but just the Moors excellent. I think even just exploring London and going to where the homeless men are killed, everything, they do hit that atmosphere very well. They can juxtapose that humorous atmosphere to the horror, and they nail that perfectly.
And that being a fish out of water kind of tale, where it's an American in London, you know what I mean? Where he doesn't know anybody, other than this nurse that he just met, and his best friend's dead. And it's like building that atmosphere from scratch is almost relatable, because a lot of people can relate to that fish out of water tale in their lives, and I think it's different than it's on the different end of the spectrum of a small town atmosphere, where there's camaraderie there, where it's like David is really kind of out of sorts. He only knows one person really, and that's really it. And I think that's effective in its own sense, and it's um, kind of looking at American Werewolf in London as the blueprint. That we didn't get more of that, but we went into almost small towns atmospheres right after American Werewolf in London, which is a little surprising, because that fish out of water tale does really work well when you take some time and build that story.
I agree. But I think that about wraps us up. I mean, that's pretty much everything I wanted to send. If we have any closing remarks, what is, if I had to say anything, what do you hope for the future of werewolf cinema when executives and great filmmakers who have the access and everything obviously watch this show and take the notes down about everything we said? What do you think they should take away from this? What are you looking for What's your
Well,
specific? I'm talking to you, executives, producers, creatives. This is what we need to do to get the werewolf back on top.
well, obviously when the Hollywood producers watch this show, I think that initial takeaway should be we should give these two guys a TV show about a
Yeah,
werewolf. Maybe in a small town. I don't
yeah.
know. Maybe we have one in the works.
Maybe something we've been working on for a while. Yeah, but yeah,
But but really, like, like we talked about, like I think practical is the way to go. Really harp on that storytelling is what we really do need, and just kind of a uniqueness where we look at the past few years where you have late phases. I'll give respect to Wolf of Snow Hollow um, and The Cursed. I mean, those are films where I can look at those movies, and be like, okay, they wanted to tell a specific story, and it's not your typical, oh gosh, another werewolf movie. You know what I mean? Where it's like,
here comes the
they,
sheriff.
yeah, they are legitimate movies in a sense.
Mhm.
So it's like, I think there can be a seriousness and a certain gravitas brought to a werewolf movie, and just don't discredit it as a random creature feature. So it's
Absolutely.
like I really hope that we kind of do put werewolves on a little pedestal.
They need it. They need their resurgence. I agree. I think, to sum it all up for me at the end here is just that if you're gonna take anything away from this podcast, if you're going into this, is I am with you on the practical effects, but catching the atmosphere and tone, making sure that you are, you know, not only just showing gore and viscera, but really setting the stage, giving us a spot that feels real, that gives you that sense of isolation, like Luke was talking about, that really makes you feel like it. Or give us a small town that feels lived in. Give us characters. Give us people to root for and care about. So that way, when they do start dying to this werewolf, it's not just the fact that they're dying brutally. It is the fact that we are seeing people we don't want to die, unfortunately, bite the bullet.
The silver bullet.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that about wraps us up on this episode of SplatterCast. The new, I guess, if you want to call it our back in the saddle again, back to basics. We're doing it. We're here. Follow us on Twitter. That's all I'm trying to say. Is we have a Twitter, SplatterCast Pod. You can keep up with us there. We're going to be posting updates and little conversation pieces. If you have any feedback, give it to us because we're new to this. We're new to this whole thing. My computer's at 4% because I didn't plug this in. I didn't think to do that. So just one of those things where it's like we're still working it out. I want feedback. I want people's advice. Tell us how we did, and we will always be improving and hopefully on a consistent basis with this, bringing you guys content that you can enjoy and just love talking horror movies with us.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot planned, so we'll see you in 2 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, hopefully not. But yeah, we've got a couple things on the docket that we're already in talks of. So we'll follow up with you guys soon. And until
Yeah.
then,
What's on the docket next, if we stick to it, should be very interesting.
yes, definitely. It's a me pick. It's a Dylan pick. So sit with that for a little bit, and then you'll see what we're talking about here. Because I have a tendency to throw some pretty wild shit around. So But yeah, I guess until then, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco. And like
And
our friend Tony Perkins used to say, we all go mad. Wait, what is it?
we all
I
go
already
a
messed.
little mad sometimes. We're rusty, guys. Give us a break.
There we
But
go. We got there. Psycho
anyway,
2 is better than Psycho. No, I'm kidding. Don't.
we will debate that. But all right, guys, take it easy.